to the open side. Karim Bete, up the goal here to Samu, who's quick. Pete Samu looking for Karim Bete. Back to Samu. Oh, that is wonderful. That is wild. That is amazing from the Wallabies.
Hi there and welcome to Pick and Drive Rugby. We are the People's Podcast, providing a platform for rugby lovers to come together and support the game that's played in heaven. I'm your host, Mitch. With me is Lachie, and we don't have Ando tonight because Ando is currently in COVID isolation, unfortunately. So he's got COVID for the second time and isn't feeling up to it tonight. But Lachie, you are with us. How are you feeling, mate?
Good. The kids are out to play. Dad's off. It'll be a good, fun record, but I am not looking forward to actually talking about the games because there wasn't much doing from round 15 for Australian teams. Mitch, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, you've actually got a bit more exciting rugby stuff to talk about than me. What have you been up to over the weekend?
Oh, it's been a busy weekend. We've been down in Tassie for the Gold-Blooded Tour, which is the regional tour around the country to promote all the World Cup activations, 100 days leading into France, all that kind of stuff. So Tassie was that leg that I was a part of organising, and we had Taniela Tupou, Angus Bell, and classic Wallaby Mark Gerard down there as well, running some clinics. So a bit of organised chaos, which was good fun. We had close to probably 50 kids at our first one on Friday night. And then Taniela and Angus came down to our rep games for the juniors and popped along to some seniors as well. We had the TRU 90th dinner to round it off on Saturday night. So a lot of socialising, shaking babies and kissing hands, or the other way around, whichever one you want to say. But it went really well, I think. And there is a very small but very passionate community down in Tassie that I was pleased to be a part of a couple of years back with the uni team. And it's nice to be back and catch up with everyone.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I have seen some photos going around on social media, and I don't know if it was down there, but I have seen it was in Canberra earlier in the week with 100 days to the World Cup, but they had like a replica trophy from when we won it all those years ago, World Cup. Was that down in Canberra?
We had it down there as well. We had a replica, which was really cool. So the kids were able to, take photos with it, hold it up, run around with it. None of them tried to pinch it, which was a good start. But yeah, it was all in really good spirits. And no, all in good spirits. And the Wallabies boys are really good. They even bought some local club merch as well from a couple of the teams down there. So they were repping a couple of local Hobart sides on their way back home, which was good to see.
Geez, they must make them in big sizes if Taniela Tupou can squeeze into the local teams.
Yeah, 3XL Canterbury, I reckon that Taruna one was. So shout out to him.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's great. So if you want to follow up and catch up on where the Wallabies are up to, I think I saw this afternoon they're in South Australia. So definitely continuing that tour around and just follow their socials. So Instagram, Facebook, all those things, it's popping up and it's getting pretty exciting. We're getting closer and closer to the World Cup, and 2027 is not that far away either. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in rugby union in Australia. But let's crack on to what we're doing tonight. So just the two of us, so Ando's not here, as I said before. We'll start things off with a bit of Aussies abroad and some news from around the grounds. We'll then cover what happened in Super Rugby Pacific, the final round of the comp, round 15. We'll try and be as positive as we can. It wasn't a very great weekend for the Aussies, unfortunately. And then we will look forward to the quarterfinals that are happening this coming weekend. Now, if you have been following our Super Rugby tipping results throughout the year, we do have, since this was the final round of the competition, everything has been tied up and it has been finalized and finished. So well done to Jojo Rabbit or Dan G. He did manage to hold on and take out the trophy this year in first place, followed closely by S. Blanco or Paul F. in second place, and then Paul W. or Team Laup in third place. Now, if you are watching us on YouTube, you will be able to see that we do have the fantastic Pick and Drive Rugby Shield.
Magnificent shield.
I'm trying to get it so you can sort of see the engravings a little bit. We've got two names on there so far. So in 2020, we had Hair Red took out Super Rugby. 2021, took out Super Rugby AU. Last year, we had Ando took out Super Rugby Pacific in the tipping comp. So this year for 2023, Jojo Rabbit will have his name nicely engraved on this shield somewhere. So just a bit of a shout out, I guess, if you do want to get involved and join in. We do have the Rugby Champs coming up. We do have the World Cup. So there's going to be lots of opportunities to get involved. I finished up 133. Lachie, where did you finish on the table?
Just snuck ahead of you, Mitch, 121. With 4 rounds of no tipping, you still weren't able to close that gap. But in fairness, away teams actually went all right for that last round. We picked up 2. So quick shout out to Jojo Rabbit, though. I haven't seen him lower than 3 for the entire season. That's an awesome tipping effort. So well done, mate. Thoroughly deserved. And looking forward to World Cup tipping as well. Keen to see some Uruguay action, a bit of Namibia, Los Lobos, some of the good teams popping up.
It's going to be exciting. And one thing we do have to, I guess, fix up for next year, because I don't know if it seems fair when you realize that if you don't put your tips in, you automatically get the home team. Or is it the away team? Which way did it fall?
You get the away team straight away.
The away team. So this ended up, you got 2 this weekend and you didn't put any tips in. And I put my tips in and only got 1 right. So I might have to put in a formal protest there and see what we can sort out.
It's a brave final round performance from you.
Yeah, one right. So I was going for the upsets, hoping to sort of climb my way back up the table. But with the Aussie performances, that's definitely not where we got to. So before we finish off and start into the podcast this week, as always, we have 2 simple calls to action. So our first one is to join our Discord channel, be part of the best Australian rugby community going around. The link is anywhere on our social media profiles. So that one is a good opportunity to just chat rugby. If you're watching the game, you can have it open and flick through some of the different forums we've got there. Lots of opportunities to talk about news, player signings, all that sort of stuff. We're pretty vocal in there, so you can chat with both Ando and myself and some of the other guys we've got in our fantasy tipping comps as well are focused in there. So do get involved, particularly with the World Cup and the Rugby Champs coming up. It's a good time of year where all Australian fans can put away their Waratahs, Reds, Force jerseys and all talk about the Wallabies and sort of share the same points of view, which is always a fun thing. And then the last call of action is please consider going to www.coffee.com/pick and drive and supporting off with a one-off or monthly payment. So everything we do in the podcast, we do for the love of rugby. We do this for love, not money, but every little bit counts. So if you do want to put in a one-off tip and support us and help us, I guess, fund the trophies for the tipping comp and all that sort of thing, do go there and consider doing that. So for the people that have done that in the past, we do appreciate that and we thank you. So you help keep the lights on, you help keep us going week in, week out. So thank you to everyone there. I think I've spoken enough. Shall we just dive into the rugby content now?
Let's rip straight in. Let's go. Welcome back, and we'll get things started quickly before we jump into our Super Rugby with a bit of Aussies abroad updates and some general news, starting over in France for the top 14. So they are through to the semi-final stage in France, and there's 4 teams left, obviously, with Bordeaux, La Rochelle, Toulouse, and Racing 92. So there's a couple of Aussies who'll be in the mix there. Bordeaux has Kane Douglas and Zach Holmes. They're through to their semi-final after knocking over, who was it? Doesn't matter because they're through now. So they'll be taking on La Rochelle. So Will Skelton and the menagerie of large championship-winning players that they've got there. Toulouse have Richie Arnold, obviously, who's been in the mix for Wallaby selection over his brother Rory, which has been interesting. And they'll be up against Racing 92, who don't have any Aussies, but they do have the ridiculously good Scottish fly half whose name currently eludes me. Help me out here, Mitch. Finn Russell, that's the one. And
is he going to play next week?
I don't know because he's been ripping and tearing, but there was the big scare with him during
the Crema red card.
Yeah. It was a big tough one. So we'll have to wait and see how they go.
Smashing him in the ruck.
Oh, it was bad. But I mean, you're probably looking at a Toulouse La Rochelle final. They've been far and away the best over there, and I'm not going to be that surprised if we see Will Skelton winning another title. So at this point, he's walking into a Wallabies jersey in most people's eyes. But that's the situation in France.
The more Aussies we've got lifting trophies around the world, the better, right?
Well, winning's a habit, so let's bring in those people who are used to it, and we'll go from there. There was one final game in the top 14, actually. There was the relegation game with Perpignan, who are right at the bottom of top 14 ladder up against Grenoble, who topped the Pro de Deux. And Perpignan has been spearheaded, that's a loose term if they're not going so great, by former Reds fly half Sam McIntyre. So he ended up having a really good game in that knockout and or relegation and got them through, scored a try, had a yellow card, but that's all right. We'll leave that one in the dust.
We'll forget
so
that.
Interesting to see how they go over there. URC and the Prem have obviously wrapped up with Sarries winning the Prem and Munster winning the URC. Couple of movements now, though. So the biggest one for Aussies would be to know that Sam Carter, probably was he a 50-cap Brumby and a handful of tests for the Wallabies in the second row. He's been,
if not more.
Yeah, he's been captaining Ulster over there, sort of on and off. But he's actually been picked up to meet up with Dan Palmer and Dan McKellar over at Leicester Tigers through the Brumbies connection. So Leicester's picking up a really good Aussie second rower. All of whom seem to be overseas. Mitch, I'm seeing a trend here of all these tall timbers running around in the UK and Europe.
It's just the money that they appreciate those guys over there. We don't seem to appreciate them as much in Australia. No matter how good you're playing as a second rower, you're still not getting the fan, the condolences and the praise that you do over in Europe. So all power to them, I guess.
Absolutely. Oh, the Tie 5 heroes over in Europe. But yes, good on Sammy Ulster. I'm not sure how long that deal's been signed for yet, but he's certainly been enjoying his footy and going well, which is good to see.
There's some interesting movings happening over with London Irish at the moment. There's talks and whispers that they're potentially facing the axe as well. Not played players for a number of weeks and financial situations going on over there.
Yeah, it looked like they were going the way of Worcester and the Wasps. They've been given an extension for a week. I read it over the weekend, so they've got a little bit of time to get their finances in order. I think there's new ownership that's looking to come in over this, next. It's probably only down to 3 or 4 days now by the time this goes to air for them to get their stuff together. But they've got a handful, or more than a handful over there. You've got Rob Simmons, you've got Joe Powell over at London Irish as well. I think there's a few more floating about.
A few years ago, they were definitely like the junior Wallabies in a regard. They had so many players over there playing for them.
They did. And again, second rowers. They're all over there. Adam Coleman was with London Irish as well. You had James Horwell recently with the Quins, I'm pretty sure, before he finished up. It's a reverse breeding ground. They're all going there for greener pastures at the back end of their career. But yeah, interesting to see how London Irish pans out. And I wonder if we'll see any of those three back over. I hear that Rob Simmons is heading to France, but Adam Coleman and Joe Powell, who knows? Maybe we'll see them back in.
Well, the big one for me is Ollie.
Ollie Hoskins. Ollie Hoskins in the front row. One cap Wallaby.
One cap Wallaby. He could be handy over in Western Australia.
Yeah, he was, and he played a couple of seasons for the Force. There've been whispers of him heading back over there. I'd say they'll get louder as soon as we have a resolution one way or another from London Irish. But interesting to see, because that competition is touted as being this really strong English domestic comp. We don't need other countries, but now you've had 3 clubs really wobbling and wavering over the past season alone.
I saw this great post on Twitter the other day that said, like, the Premiership in England, it said the most competitive rugby competition in the world, ? And it had the last 4 years and 4 different teams that had won it. So we had Saracens, we had Harlequins, we had, I think, was it Sale and someone else? And all the comments were like...
Bristol and Quins, yeah.
And all the comments underneath were like, maybe the most competitive, but when you kick 3 teams out in the space of a year and a half, let's just get the financials sorted first before we start boasting about that. I think
that's rugby brass trying to toot their own horn a little. But yeah, I saw that one too. It's interesting to see. But, as we're about to touch into, Super Rugby isn't doing itself any favours after the final round that we saw. But we'll wrap up the Aussies abroad on a slightly more positive note. And that's to say that the domestic and regular season that our Wallaroos have had over in the Premier 15s has been amazing. So, unfortunately, the Quins trio of M. Chancellor, Caitlin Laney and Arabella McKenzie, they will not play finals. They finished up 5th. But Exeter, with Laurie Kramer and Michaela Leonard before she came back to the Force, they've been carving up. They've just wrapped up 2nd spot on the ladder, so they'll get a home semi-final against Sarries. And their final game of the season, which was played this past weekend, they thumped the minor premiers by 40 points. So they're in a really good vein of form. So we could potentially have Laurie Kramer coming back to Australia ahead of the Pac 4 with a title under her belt. which would
That'd
be
be awesome.
such a cool thing to see. Joining the likes of Sarah Nagama, Georgia Cormick as winning trophies abroad, which is super, super cool for the game. But also, with our Quins wrapping up early, very strong chance and strong indications that we'll see Caitlin Laney, Arabella McKenzie, and M. Chancellor in Wallaroos colours by the Black Ferns test.
No guarantee that they crack the 23, though, is there? There's such competition for spots at the moment.
I don't know. I reckon
Caitlin
Caitlin Laney and Arabella McKenzie were in the Premier 15's team of the week 4 times out of 5. Whenever I check through, those two in particular have been braining it. There's huge competition around the flankers role. So I'd say M's, going to be in a tight tussle. But Caitlin Laney in the second row and bringing someone in to steer the ship, crucial for the Wallaroos heading into that Black Ferns test. And who doesn't want Laurie Kramer in the team? Legend.
That's it. That's right. Yeah, definitely.
Which is awesome. We'll quickly jump into some news now. And the main one that we want to have a look at are the re-signings that have been announced in the past week. Obviously, we haven't been on air, haven't given you an episode for 8 days now. So there's been plenty of water under the bridge when it comes to re-signings. And there are 4 big ones that have been confirmed all the way through to the end of 2025, all 4 of these. So we've got Throbber Robertson, Tom Robertson over at the Force. He signed a really interesting 2-year deal that includes a sabbatical to head over to Oxford to pick up his upteenth master's degree or whatever he's doing over there. We've also got Langy Gleeson signed through to 2025, the end. Caden Neville has signed through to the end of 2025. And the touch point that I'd love to get your thoughts on, Mitch, is Suli Vunivalu signing a 2-year extension through to the end of 2025. Is he now Eddie Jones' pet project? Is this the hill that he's going to die on?
Without a doubt, he's got to be, right? I was really surprised when I saw this email come through from RA. I did not expect to see Sully sticking around. I have question marks whether he'll even make the World Cup squad later this year or even the Rugby Champs team if it's based on form. I know Eddie Jones loves a leaguey and he loves, taking these players in and giving them experience and coaching them and bringing out their best. So that element might be what gets him across the line, but you wouldn't say his form this year has been outstanding for the Reds. So many injuries. I was pretty certain coming into this season that we'd have an announcement midway through the year that he's switching back to the NRL, going either to Redcliffe or back to the Storm or somewhere, just jumping ship back to the NRL to sort of go back to the greener pastures over there in his mind. But no, he stuck it out. So all credit to him. He's putting his mouth where his money where his mouth is, and he's giving it another 2 years. He's really pushing his stake and his claim for the World Cup this year and the Lions series in 2025. So all credit to him. Sticking at the Reds too. Be interesting to see what happens in terms of their makeup of 2024 with who they have coming across as coach there, and if he's maybe got some insights into who's coming, and that sort of helped him make that decision. But it's a great thing for Australian rugby to have these high-profile players sticking around.
Massively. Having Lang and Gleeson sign is a huge deal with a young back rower who's got a bit of mongrel about him coming through. Caden Neville, I thought, was a really interesting signing, obviously sticking around with the Brumbies, a more experienced head, and Tom Robertson playing both sides of the scrum and having probably his best year of Super Rugby that we've seen. In my opinion, he's been massively important for that Force side. So to me. Yeah.
It's been a bit of a mixed week for Tom Robinson, unfortunately, because he comes out and announces that he's sticking around with the sabbatical, but then also suffers was it ACL injury or MCL, or injures his knee in some regard, and he's basically out for the rest of the year. So he won't be going to France, unfortunately, for the World Cup. And that's a big blow for the Wallabies, particularly with Alan Alatoa also currently on the sideline with injury.
Yeah. Plus you got Angus Bell and Tani Alatupo still, waiting to return to play. So, Throbber would have been a massive in, and now we're looking at, who are our props? Do we call on a Scott CEO? Do we throw a Hail Mary out to, Ollie Hoskins and see what he's up to?
We might have to. Harry Johnson-Holmes also injured himself this week for the Waratahs, so he's out as well. So, Eddie Jones has a bit of a battle on his hands to get a fit front row for that first test in Pretoria in a few weeks.
I'll tell you who's a bolter for that. Well, I reckon it's a bolter. Sammy Talakai.
Yeah, it's a good shout.
He's been playing really, really well, but we'll get into that a little later. But he's been very impressive. So, yes, those are our signings. And also expect some kind of news this week about James Slipper re-signing. We've been getting a few little whispers around. It would be great to see him stick around, but hoping to get some good news on the James Slipper front shortly. So we'll move now quickly to our Sevens program. And there's been a couple of really big ins for our Youth Commonwealth Games Sevens squad. So the Youth Commonwealth Games are coming up over in the West Indies later this month. And the Sevens team, women's Sevens team, is coached by Shannon Parry, which is super awesome. Obviously, we've been talking about her retirement and how much she's given to the game, and she keeps giving in this coaching role. And she's picked two big names in that squad. We've got Caitlin House, who's been killing it for the Tars all year in Super W as a 16-year-old. But we've also got Faitala Maleka, who made a Wallaroos debut against Fijiana. So really excited to see how those two go, along with the rest of the squad later in the year. And our under-20s, our junior Wallabies, have won the Junior Bledisloe. They've brought it home on aggregate. We don't care that it's only a 2-game series. We scored more points.
We don't care that the Junior Bledisloe Cup technically doesn't exist, but let's just keep drumming, keep making noise and keep, flying that flag because we won something.
The dynasty starts now, but they were really good games. It was really good to see our junior Wallabies go over. Couple of standouts from that first game. We won 36-28. We only lost the second by a point. It was 18-19 at the end, but a couple of Tars and New South Welshman Teddy Wilson captaining the side. Obviously, he's been getting some time for the Tars. Young 10 Jack Bowen having some really good impact. And then a few props, a bit of love to our big boys up the front. Jack Barrett and Massimo De Lutis were picked out by Paul Cully in his coverage for Sydney Morning Herald as players who really stood up, particularly in that second game, which is great to see us breeding a few more front rowers because it is such an important position, particularly Australia-wise, given our past proclivity for scrummaging. It's changing now, but it's always good to see some front rowers getting brought through the system. So how good for our junior Wallabies?
I was also really impressed with Darby Lancaster making the transition from sevens into 15s, and I don't remember if he played much of the first test, but in the second test he was on the wing and he had pretty immediate impact, and I was pretty impressed with just his strong ball carry, as we've sort of come to expect from the sevens program, just having their knowledge and the confidence with ball in hand to, even when they're out wide in defense, to be able to go for the pilfer. So again, another. What was that?
No, keep going. Sorry.
I was going to say another strength of this sevens program. We're seeing these players come back into the 15s game and have immediate impact, which is awesome.
It took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to highlight, the Tim Anstey's, the Corey Tools, who are the Lachie Andersons, who've all been really strong for their super franchises this year. Darby Lancaster's got a big future, I certainly like to think, down at the Rebels in the coming years too.
Yep, really exciting to see what he can do down there. So what's next for these under-20s?
So coming up for the under-20s is the World Championship. So that's going to be starting on the 24th of June. So creeping up 3 weeks now, which is super exciting. So they'll be off over in South Africa, kicking off their campaign. I haven't got the list of what pool they're in up in front of me, but we haven't had a really strong campaign at the World Champs since that team, with the Harry Wilsons and the Nick Frosts and the Mark Nwanganita Aussies that went all the way through to the final and lost to France by a point. So we're desperately chasing an under-20s championship. We've seen how successful countries that can lock in a couple of under-20s championships can be further down the line. The South Africas, the New Zealands, and the Frances have been going from strength to strength off the back of those programs. So big shout out to our junior Wallabies. Super excited for their campaign in the coming month, and we'll definitely be bringing you updates as they go because it's a massive part of Australian rugby.
Do we know if it's on Stan? I was just trying to do a quick search and you beat me to it.
Well, I reckon it would be. The last game of that Trans-Tasman Junior Bledisloe, quote unquote, was broadcast on Stan. I think it was just before would have been the Canes Crusaders game, the Cake Tin. So maybe that's why it was put up.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
But I'd certainly like to see it broadcast, so fingers crossed.
Let's see. I'm scrolling through. We've got, I don't know, it's not coming up. Watch this space. we'll let you know. We'll get back to you on that one. But yeah, anything else for the news section, or can we keep moving and dive into Super Rugby for this week?
No, let's keep moving. I've had you too long.
All right, let's go. All right, it's time to talk some rugby now. So we had the final round of Super Rugby Pacific for 2023, round 15. So we had some results not going necessarily in Australia's way, unfortunately. Kiwis are happy, Aussies aren't. I think that's the general takeaway. Fijians are very happy, but general takeaway from Super Rugby Pacific this year. We'll run through the results, then we might sort of dive into the overall table and see where everyone finished, and then we'll go game by game. And after that, we'll look at the quarterfinals coming up this following weekend. So first game of the weekend, we had the Blues 19 against the Highlanders 9. We then had the Brumbies 33 over the Rebels 17. Fiji Drua absolutely thumped the poor Queensland Reds 41-17 over there in Suva, I think this one was. We then had the Hurricanes with the upset of the round somewhat, 27-26 over the Crusaders. The second upset of the round, and take your pick whether this was more of an upset, were the Moana Pacifica getting their first win of the year over the Waratahs in Sydney, 33-24 there. Michael Hooper's final game for the home game for the team in blue, and so that was a bit of an upset on all fronts. And then we had the Chiefs absolutely pummeling the Western Force 43-19 in the final game of the round in Perth. So we'll dive into some of the games in detail in a little bit, but let's look at the overall table and see where teams finished. So why don't you dive through this, Lachie? You read through the teams and where they finished, and then we might chat about some of the placings.
Alrighty, so top of the pops, not unexpected. We've got the Chiefs. They finished with 13 wins and 1 loss. And then you've got a logjam. 2, 3, and 4 are the Crusaders, Blues, and Brumbies. They've all got 10 wins and 4 losses respectively, but bonus points getting the Crusaders up into second for a home quarter and potentially a semi-final. The good news for Australian fans is the Brumbies did manage to keep 4th spot with their win over the Rebels, so they will have a home quarter final against the Hurricanes, who finished in 5th, 9 wins, 5 losses, and that'll be a repeat of last year's quarterfinal at GIO Stadium. Coming in 6th, regardless of their loss to Moana, were the New South Wales Waratahs that already had that wrapped up from the previous round with 6 wins and 8 losses. Fiji and Drua coming through with the same win-loss ratio after a big win over my Reds, locking in their first ever finals appearance in just their second season. So exciting to see that, but we'll touch on it in a tick. And dragging their feet, their bloated carcasses over the finish line, battered and bruised. My poor Queensland Reds, a finals record with 5 wins and 9 losses doesn't make for the best reading. But the main thing out of all that is they've snuck in ahead of the Highlanders. My season-long campaign to make sure that they don't get into the finals has been realised. Thank you to the Blues. So the Highlanders finished with the same 5-9 win-loss ratio. That's how the Force ended up as well in 10th, with the Rebels 4 wins, 10 losses, bringing in 11th, and Moana, somewhat deservedly, I have to say, coming home with a wet sail, picking up 1 win for the year over the Tars, but ultimately doesn't make for particularly happy reading for our Australian teams. We've only got 1 in the top 4, 2 more in the top 8, and we're having some pretty big quarterfinal challenges ahead of us, I'd say, Mitch. But let's look at the games in detail now.
All right, let's go back to the results. So just focusing, I guess, on the New Zealand derby. So we had the Blues over the Highlanders 19-9 starting off the weekend, and then the Hurricanes upsetting the Crusaders 27-26. Were there any kind of major talking points or things that caught your eye in either of these 2 games?
Not particularly. I was not surprised by the Blues getting up over the Highlanders at home. I think the really cynical part of me thought maybe the Blues would get a tap on the shoulder from NZ Rugby and go, hey, let's let this one by the wayside maybe. Let's play a couple of benchies and see if we can get 5 teams in. But I was very glad as a Reds fan at least, and an Australian rugby fan, to see that the Highlanders missed out. Hurricanes Crusaders was really interesting for me, though. There was lots of hoo-ha, in the game. A few fisticuffs between, Cody Taylor and Dane Coles having a bit of fun. But it ended up being a really big comeback from the Hurricanes. They overturned that halftime deficit and came home with a wet sail. And it's posing a really big challenge now to the Brumbies in the quarterfinal. That momentum that the Hurricanes now have and beating the Crusaders just before you get into knockout footy, really ominous signs.
There are some injuries that are impacting this Crusaders team at the moment, but from what we've come to expect of the Crusaders over the last few years, they're definitely not in the form that this time of year warrants. We've always known them to, even if they've started years slowly, they always seem to come good towards the last 3 or 4 rounds of the competition and sort of lead into the finals red hot. We're not seeing that this year, so it'll be really interesting to see how they go next week. We're not jumping too far ahead, but they do play the Drua, and I mean that's going to be a big game for them, and you'd hope that they can get up for it. And geez, wouldn't it be exciting to see an upset Drua kicking the Crusaders out of Super Rugby Pacific in the quarterfinals? How good would that be?
It would be. It is the dream. It's the dream. Honestly, I would rather see the Drua knock off Crusaders than my Reds beat the Chiefs again. I think it would be one of the best narratives for Super Rugby, but that's a pipe dream. Sending the Drua, who have famously travelled poorly all year, they've picked up 1 win away from home, and that was against Moana at Mount Smart in round 1. So they are not a travelling side from what we've seen. And the Crusaders at home, yes, they've dropped it by a point to the Hurricanes, but the week prior, as I'm sure you remember, they dished out a great hiding to the Tars. So I think the kind of vein of form that they could find themselves in over the next 3 weeks is a bit scary. And so is the Chiefs as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about New Zealand teams is they always have an extra level to take it to, which unfortunately the Aussies don't always seem to have or able to reach that level. We have to be playing at our absolute best all the time just to match them. And then they kick it into 4th gear and we're like, where did you get this 4th gear from? This is ridiculous. It's unfair. Focusing a little bit on that first game, the Blues and the Highlanders. The Blues have been interesting the last few weeks. Yes, they've got the win, but they've kind of been coming in and out of games and they haven't really been playing a full 80-minute performance. Do you think that that's going to hamper their progress in the semis and in the finals?
Absolutely. I think, and we've touched on this a few times throughout the year, the Blues are the best side when they're on, when they're switched on. And to that extent, they're almost the most Aussie of those sides. They have their peaks and their troughs. They've obviously got their strike weapons. Mark Talley is an entire team by himself at this point of the season. But to mine, the Blues are the most likely to drop a game come finals time and not be able to handle the pressure that the Chiefs and the Crusaders can apply. So
all the Waratahs.
All the Waratahs. And truly, I think the Waratahs have the best shot of an upset rather than the Drua or the Reds at this point. The Blues, if you can catch them early and really put them under pressure without, I think the fear factor of losing to a close rival in New Zealand and the atmosphere, I think a quarterfinal is actually a pretty good time for the Tars to go over there and just sink absolutely everything into them. So I'm excited to see how these quarterfinals pan out. And I'll hang my hat. 8 teams does make this exciting. It does make it exciting at this point of the season.
It gives us more rugby to watch. It gives us that extra week of finals. And how good was it? And we'll get to that in a moment. But how good was it that the Drua, even though they were so far down the table, if we only took the top 6, they're not making it. So how good was it to see that game actually meant something? And that's, I guess, one of the points of, or the merits of this 8-team final series.
Yeah, for sure. And we will touch on it in that wrap of the game, but the intensity was electric all through the stadium at Suva, especially from halftime onwards as the team began to build into the game and you knew that they were going through to a finals. It was unbelievable. And hopefully one day we'll see a finals game in Suva.
That will be awesome. Well, we might do the Aussie games backwards in a sense. So we might start with the Force and work our way back because by all credit, the Brumbies game was probably the game of the round. So we'll leave them to last. So the Force 19, Chiefs 43. I, somewhat silly now, tipped the Force and were hoping that they might be able to keep their their home record alive. But this Chiefs team really have made a statement this year, and they've shown that you really need to be on your game to trip them up. And only one team has done that this year, and that's the Reds. But the Force, geez, they did not come into this game looking like they were there to kind of cause an upset or to really challenge the Chiefs.
Not at all. The Chiefs run in 3 tries in the opening 20 minutes, and it took all the oxygen out of the stadium. There was a really big Chiefs contingent actually in the crowd, which I wasn't expecting. Maybe it's all the Kiwis, jumping on the Chiefs bandwagon and running around. I was surprised there weren't any cowbells, honestly. But all those first 3 tries were scored right in front of a huge block of them at HBF Park. So it almost seemed like a Chiefs home game at times. It was incredible. But the team that they rolled out, the Chiefs, let's quickly go through who they left at home. 9 All Blacks. 9 All Blacks left at home. Brad Weber, Brodie Retallick, Sam Cane, Luke Jacobson, Damien McKenzie, Josh Giovanni, and the list goes on and on. It's ridiculous. And plus their starting front rowers, Aiden Ross and George Dyer. So you're effectively running out of Chiefs B, and they still never looked like they were in trouble in that game. They were in total control. Even though the Force had 57% possession, they dominated the territory as well. Their counterattack was so strong that they never looked troubled. There was always a double-digit margin from the 20-minute mark.
And just the simple errors the Force put themselves under, just their poor decision-making, kicks not going out or going out on the full. Just it seemed like nothing was going their way this game. Max Bury scored that fantastic opportunistic try where he sort of kicks it through, going for the 50-22 and then ends up keeping it in and scores off it. But apart from that, there was some really poor defense shown by the Force this game. And it's worrying for them that they weren't able to get up and sort of put in a good performance for their last home game of the year in front of their Sea of Blue.
I wonder how much of that is the fatigue factor that we've spoken about previously, Mitch. Well, I know we mentioned after the Rebels game where they got pretty well hammered. How much does that weigh into it? All the travel back and forward across the Pacific, coming across the Nullarbor every time you're not in Perth as well, so it's an extra 5 hours. They didn't look like they were ready to play. They really looked like...
Who did they play last week?
Start. The Rebels put 50 points in them at Amy Park.
Oh, that was last week. Yeah, so they did travel.
That was last week.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things, isn't it, that teams this year aren't able to back it up, and that travel element is really showing on some teams particularly, and particularly the teams that don't have a lot of depth and don't have the option of bringing in young guys that still have experience, like the Drua and like the Force, that when you add that 6 hours of travel to get back home at the beginning of the week, it kind of just saps everything away from you.
Yeah, agree. It just looked a little lethargic, and some of those passing errors where balls aren't going to hand. There was an intercept picked off from Hamish Stewart. Decisions that you don't make when you're fresh. And I feel as though once those first 3 tries were ran in, you go, okay, this game's packed up. And it wasn't much of a watch, if we're honest.
And it was also like Falau Fainga got close a few times and just dropped the ball on the line once or twice. So it's not that the players weren't trying. It's just that sometimes some players were trying a little bit too hard at times as well. And so it just felt like things weren't going their way. And when you're going up against the table leading Chiefs who, are out to make a statement and want to continue their run into the finals well, you need to be at your absolute best. Let's keep moving along. And so the second game for the Aussies was the Waratahs getting shocked by Moana 33-24. This was Michael Hooper's last home game in Sydney for the Waratahs. I was out there for it. Pretty disappointing result in a lot of ways. What were your thoughts of the game?
I was disappointed too. I was disappointed for Hoops. I really enjoyed watching some of the Hooper cam, actually. Stan Sport ran a really cool segment where they filmed him the entire game. And watching that man off the ball and his work rate to get back into position to lead kick chase was incredible. So a bit like the Force, I don't think the Tars lost for a lack of trying, especially if we're looking at Michael Hooper. But what really stood out for me in this game was how well Moana disrupted the Tars set piece, particularly at line out time. So Moana's coming in as this, perceived unstructured team. They haven't won a game, so they're desperate, but their lineup was really strong. The Tars ended up operating at about barely 70%. So they were picking off 1 in 4, and so much pressure that Moana was able to build came off set piece, which I don't think the Tars were expecting.
There was an interesting stat that came out, or a question, I think it was in one of the post-game interviews, potentially with Ned Hannigan, that comes to mind, that they sort of asked him, the set piece, the lineup particularly wasn't firing this week. What do you put that down to? And he made a comment that was quite confusing. It was like, yeah, we actually recognized that in ourselves in the week leading into it. So at training, we realized that we probably weren't quite on and we weren't able to overcome that. And so that is really kind of worrying, that they went into the game knowing that that was an area of weakness and that was somewhere they might have been exploited, and they definitely were and weren't able to overcome that.
That's interesting. How much do you think comes down to complacency as well? I mean, the Tars had 6 locked up. They couldn't go higher. They couldn't go lower. You're playing against a Moana team who is beyond desperate for a win as well. So it's kind of the perfect storm for things to go wrong if they're not right from the start of that week too.
There was a question asked of DC in the press conference after the game of, do you think some players were looking ahead, looking at the quarterfinal next week? And his response to that was, we spoke about it in the lead up in our preview meeting on Monday or Tuesday. We kind of said, if your head is in the quarterfinal next week, then you shouldn't be here right now. We have a game. We need to focus on this. And so that's what our focus needs to be. I guess that doesn't necessarily mean that it worked, just saying that. And evidently it didn't. Mm-hmm. Some of those players, selection issues aside, players played poorly across the board. It wasn't just 1 or 2 players that had an exceptionally bad game. I don't think anyone really, unfortunately, played all that well for the Waratahs. And the worrying thing is that this has happened a few times this season for the Waratahs. Coming into that first game, they hyped up the homecoming, the game against the Brumbies, that we want to start this year well. We're going to beat the Brumbies. We're going to have a run at home. We're going to do really well. And they lost that game. And you could see that heads dropped and that they weren't able to mentally overcome that. And that's why their performance for the next few weeks was really down. Again, they sort of put a lot of emphasis on this game is Michael Hooper's last game at home. We want to put in a big performance for him. It was their biggest, unfortunately, in some ways, it was their biggest crowd of the year. So big that they actually opened the second tier of Allianz Stadium, which they haven't done all year. It's always been just the bottom ring. So that was cool to get there and be able to get a different vantage point as a fan. But then they didn't show up again, and they didn't show up in round 1 against the Brumbies. And so that's where questions need to start being asked of, is it a preparation thing? Is it a warm-up thing? Is it what is it that's just not allowing these players to be ready when that whistle goes at 7:30 on a Saturday night?
That's a really interesting point heading into it, because I actually thought that the Tars started okay. I thought the first probably 20 to 30 minutes was really competitive. There was a bit of back and forward. I think Moana got a lot of energy from that first, break off the kickoff. You've suddenly got Levi Almoa running 60 meters, and everyone's thinking, oh, this is it. Jeez.
They're going to score here.
Oh, it was terrifying. But, I mean, we were able to get back. The Tars were able to get back into the game. You had, the Walton kick for Markey's try was really good. There were some bright, sparking moments. And then second half, it just fizzled. It just fizzled a little bit.
It felt like, particularly sort of 35-minute mark, the momentum swung Moana's way, and the Waratahs weren't able to get that momentum back. They weren't able. You could see that certain players were trying to do big things. Michael Hooper didn't stop all night. The full 80 minutes, he was making big hits. He was carrying the ball. Even at the end of the game there, when the game's really on the line and the bonus point, the losing bonus point, which realistically at this point doesn't mean anything. But Michael Hooper takes it upon himself. They get close to the line and try to score. They don't end up doing it. They get a penalty. Kick to the corner, take the maul. Michael Hooper himself gets the ball at the back of the maul and pushes the team himself over the line to get the points. Scores the last try, basically last play of the game, which is just so Michael Hooper that, the I'll do it mentality. I don't like really calling out individual players but there's definitely something positionally and sort of tactically wrong with Ben Donaldson at the moment. And he just did not look comfortable at all this game. And the disappointing thing was that Michael Hooper scores that try. They need to convert that try to come within 7 points to get the losing bonus point, and he misses the kick. And so that kind of, for me, just sums up Michael Hooper's last few years with the Waratahs of, I will do everything I can to get this team over the line, and someone else lets it down for him.
Yeah, I think in Dono's case as well, he was probably not at his best, but he was outshunned by a former Aussie player in Christian Liliafano who had a blinder in his possible. I don't know how long his contract for Moana, but he had a cracking game. He scored that really good try in the second half that really started driving the nail home in the 61st minute.
That little runaway try where just no one wanted to touch him.
No one wanted to borrow him. Yeah, Marky Mark jumps up for a dummy that was, barely from the hip, and then everyone just stood off him. It was like a guard of honor all the way through to the line, and then you've got...
It's like, this way, sir?
For you. And then you've got 5 minutes later, Miracle Failangi goes across for a try that was definitely a forward pass. You'd have to say that second Failangi try.
Yeah.
But I mean...
But, we won't get into the... How good is... Liliafano this season, he's been... I wouldn't say he's back to his, Wallabies' best form, but he's definitely back to good form. And there are talks that he might feature for, I think, Tonga at this World Cup or Samoa.
For Samoa, yeah.
Samoa, yeah. There's talks that he might be lacing the boots up for Samoa. So that'll be pretty cool to see him going to his second World Cup with a different team than last time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, isn't that what the whole, international eligibility is about? It's getting these smaller nations who don't have the availability and the depth of player to come back to where their roots are, and having Liliafano steering a Samoan side around, would be so good to see for the game and for our Pacifica community as well.
And I wouldn't be surprised if he does play the World Cup for Samoa, if that kind of is it and he calls time on his career. Nothing officially announced at this point, but he's been such a fantastic player for so long that I wouldn't be surprised to see him sort of end it there. Was there anything else you want to say about this game, or shall we move into the somewhat disappointing Reds game?
Well, come on, let's tackle the Reds now.
41-17 to the Fiji Drua over the Queensland Reds. Not only was it a victory, but it was a bonus point victory. The Reds didn't concede a point in the second half. It was 17 all at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
What happened in that second half? How did this Fiji team just completely run away with this game?
The Reds were playing against 15,000 fans as well as the 15 on the field.
The 16th man, as Nick Byrne likes
the
to call
16th army. It was incredible. So, I mean, I thought that the first half was pretty evenly balanced, but there was a moment about 30 minutes in where I think we're sitting at about maybe, 17-14 or 14-10, and the Drua out of nowhere bust out at tight head and just smashed the Reds back, and the entire crowd went up in a storm of sound. And I thought, oh no, we're in trouble. We're in trouble here. And then it kept happening. So a bit like how Moana targeted the Tars set piece, the Drua ended up smashing the Reds set piece, which has been the fulcrum of their attack for the entire year. The Reds were operating at 70% for scrum time and about the same at line out. They were just picking them off all day. And that, coupled with how well the Drua's outside backs were playing. I mean, yes, they're scoring all the tries, and that initial work up front, its set piece time allowed them to do that. So 17 all at halftime, you're thinking, oh, this is a bit shaky. And then bang, they've run in another 3 tries in the second half. The Drua had 8 line breaks to none. The Reds could not bust the line at all in this game. And as soon as Fraser McWright went to the bin in the early second half, it was just bang. Game was going to be over from there. Drua were too good to let that opportunity and not capitalise on all the hype that their home crowd were giving them.
There was a fair few uncharacteristic errors from the Queensland Reds in this game, particularly in the second half. James O'Connor dropped a lot of ball, even away from pressure. It kind of looked at times like there wasn't many leaders out there and no one was really sticking their hand up and sort of saying, this is the way forward, this is what we need to do. Is that how you kind of read how that second half kind of fell and went to pieces?
I think that's a fair assessment. There's a lot missing without Liam Wright out there. I'm a big Liam Wright fan, and I think he probably would have been in the mix for Wallabies, if I'm honest, after the season that he'd had. But his voice and his calm and his demeanour was really missed in that second stanza. You've got Tate McDermott, running around, sniping all the time. Jock was having a bit of an off day, James O'Connor, sorry. And you're right about the handling as well. I don't know whether it was storming or whether it was just greasy or what was going on.
I think it was raining and hot and humid. So
it was steaming off the field.
Yeah.
It was horrendous conditions, but yet the Drua are running around, chipping things, regathering on the fly. I just honestly, it was fate for the Drua to win that game and win it well. And the way that it's panned out has seen both teams go through to the finals. So you can't knock it too badly. I'm not sure what's worse for the Reds, to face the Chiefs or the Crusaders in that semi, but the Drua thoroughly deserved it. They played brilliantly, and a big shout out has got to go to Celestino Rabatamunda, who has been so good on the wing all year, but in the past couple of weeks has found himself at fullback and was untouchable. I think he had 3 line breaks, scored a try. He had that charge down at the very start of Felipe Dalguna that just switched the crowd on straight away. He is going to be a real star.
Third minute,
Love to see him in a flying Fijian jersey at the World Cup.
That's going to be really exciting to see how many of these Drua players do transition across to the flying Fijians. And you would imagine that it's a pretty strong backline or pretty strong sort of contingent of players that form that. And then you get the sprinkling of Semi Radradra and some of those other foreign players that come in, and it's a bit scary to think about it as a Wallabies fan sitting here and thinking of the team scary. That we might be facing.
You've got Levani Bodia over at La Rochelle. Penny Ravai's been playing well for the Reds, but people like Radradra coming in, Tamosi Tavatanawai over at Moana, who's just a monster, comes in on form. They're a stacked side, Fiji, and if Eddie Jones is looking at that pool game, that's the one I'm circling as the danger game. It's not Wales. Wales will be tough, but Fiji is the one where you're going, we need to get this in the bag.
So James O'Connor was named this week at fly half, and that was a decision by Brad Thorne to kind of bring his experience closer to the ball. It didn't really work. What do you think they do next week moving forward? Next week into the quarterfinal? Is it do they shift him back to 12 and bring Tom Liner into 10? Is that kind of the way you see that's going to go?
In their position, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be putting Jock back to 12 because that's what worked against the Chiefs a couple of weeks back when they won. Jock had a really, really good game there. And when Tommy Liner was on, he did a really good job as well. So I think you need that midfield anchor. Hunter Paisami, for me, didn't quite do a job there at 12. He was really willing. He ran hard. He enjoyed that contact. But I think to match it with the Chiefs and the guile that they have in their backline, you need a James O'Connor in the centre of the field gluing that together. So for mine, James O'Connor plays 12 against the Chiefs to give us any kind of sniff.
Interesting. Let's see what happens, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we preview the quarters shortly. The last Aussie game of the weekend saw the Brumbies 33 over the Melbourne Rebels 17. Now, the Rebels were in this for the first maybe 15 minutes of the game, and then things started to fall to pieces. The Rebels lost both of their hookers in the first half. Jordan Walesi went off with a neck injury, and then Alex Murphy, I think, also went off for a HIA and failed it. So that resulted in the last 45 minutes or so being played with uncontested scrums. The Rebels looked good at parts in that first sort of opening 10, 15 minutes, but the Brumbies realistically weren't ever troubled in this game. Do you think that's a fair estimate of how things played out?
Bang on. As soon as Corey Toole scores that try in the 16th minute, you're starting to see the gap in class. But you mentioned that Ulesi, heading off, ironically. That was a shocking tackle attempt. It was that grass cutter style that we've seen be penalised quite heavily previously. And I know he's, knocked himself out just about and was taken off the field. But for mine, that's got to go. That's got to get out of our game. He almost tried to, take a bite out of Caden Neville's knee, the way that it was flying at him with his head down, no arms. He's really,
and then he ends up
dangerous.
he makes connection with his knee or his hip, and then he's out cold, and then lands on his head, and momentum sort of carries him over it. So I haven't seen. He was up walking later in the game, so he didn't do too bad an injury, but it wasn't a good look, and he had potential there to really hurt himself quite badly.
And hurt Neville as well. It's just poor tackle technique. His head's down, he's diving forward towards the ground, and no arms. I mean, that's shocking defense. So
there's only one instance where you should be allowed to do that, and that's if you've got an afro like Tatafu Plotter now that's kind of acts as like a cushion for both players.
It does, and it also channels the energy behind you.
Yeah,
which is critical. God, I missed Tatafu. But it's a real pet peeve of mine, seeing those no arms grass cutters in sort of tight pick and drive situations. It's so dangerous for the defender, for the attacker, and I'm not going to say that it's deserved that he knocked himself out, but clearly, if you're applying the wrong tackle technique, bad things can happen.
And that's why it's wrong, isn't it? Because you end up hurting yourself. If we keep moving on, there's a hit a little bit later in the game, almost a similar situation on Andrew Kellaway. Now, Nick White comes into the breakdown. He's trying to clear Andrew Kellaway out, who's come through the breakdown, and connects him in the head with his knee. Now, from what it looked like on the screen, Andrew Kellaway basically lost consciousness straight away, sort of fell to the ground, and Nick White standing there, yelling, pointing at him at the referee. I haven't heard any sort of carry on from that, whether he's been cited or it's been reviewed. But do you think that needs to be looked at a little bit more?
I think any head contact of a significant nature, especially on a hard surface like a hip, knee, needs to be reviewed straight away. I just think it's player safety first and foremost. I didn't actually catch that one.
You haven't seen it. I'll have to see the clip and get you to see what you think.
Yeah,
I've seen a few things on Twitter going around about it from people who have seen it.
But I think it's just player safety at that point. And we've seen those little inconsistencies through the season where players who could have significant injuries haven't been looked at. Others have been milking that time. And I know that referees are getting the waters off and moving the game along, which is great. But player safety still has to be the most important aspect of our game. It's something that we probably excel over other codes at, especially around the concussion space, but we need to keep improving rather than be stagnant.
And the last injury thing that we'll talk about before we move into the actual game and talk about some of the highlights, but Nick Frost, did you see the injury the knee injury or the
bendy knees,
rubber legs, non-knee injury? Like, what was that? That hurts him, like hyperextends his knees on the ground, rolling around in what appeared to be pain. The physio comes on and does some kind of magic on his knee, and he gets up and plays on.
Magic water, a bit of magic spray. Those used to talk about that. It looked so nasty to me.
It really looked bad.
With your joints bending the wrong way, no good in my book. So great to see him up and running again. But whatever that medic's dishing out, let's get some.
Let's get some into Tupou. That might help his World Cup campaign. But apart from that, the Brumbies really, they looked pretty clinical in parts in this game, and the Rebels kind of allowed that in a lot of ways. They scored a lot of their points from counterattack and just simple errors made by the Melbourne Rebels. Do you think this game was a good time? Like, it came in the season well for the Rebels, for the Brumbies, leading into the finals. Do you think that this sets them up well, or do you think that they might have benefited a little bit more playing maybe a team like, say, the Blues or the Crusaders?
I think it's a good time for them because they need confidence going into finals. You're coming up against probably a very brash, a very confident Hurricane side coming off a Crusaders win. And to be able to not be at your best but still put 5 tries on the Rebels is important. And you mentioned the counterattack. They were really good at picking off those passes and coming through. I think it was just after halftime, the full-length try from a handling error, and Tom Wright ends up going in the corner, like a 14-point turnaround.
Which is his first try. That was his first try at GAO this year. I mean, the form that
Wow.
he's been in this season, the fact that he's not scored more tries for the Brumbies at home is almost criminal.
That's outrageous. Oh, God, I had no idea. That's a great stat. But yeah,
Corey
as
Toole's
soon as
been
he goes
scoring a lot
over,
of tries.
yeah, that's true. He's been hogging them all. But yeah, and Tom Wright goes over when realistically you're seeing an overlap for the Rebels. They should be scoring. Bang, 2-try turnaround, and then 5 minutes later, Ollie Sapsford goes, through that gap. I think Muirhead ends up scoring the try. No, that was the one at the end. But Sapsford goes over. They're long-range tries from errors that have probably typified the Rebels season. They're pushing, they're getting to the line, and it's that last decision that always seems to cruel the Rebels. And the Brumbies were good enough to pick that off. So that's a really good sign, because we know in knockout footy, chances become limited. You're probably not going to have the same space. So it's about picking off those opportunities. And if the Brumbies can do that, it's a really good warm-up for the Hurricanes coming along next week.
Focusing a little bit on the Rebels, it was a disappointing end to their season. They finished in 10th place. They had, if we skip ahead, looking at the screen here, they've only got 4 wins. Now, that's not a true representation, I think, of their season. They've been in a lot of games. They've been in games a lot more than that final result sort of shows. They've played some really good football. They've been a really great team to watch this year. This is probably the first year in a long time that we can sort of confidently say that this Melbourne Rebels team qualifies being in Super Rugby Pacific. And I know that sounds horrible and saying we need to have 5 teams as Australia, but the Rebels have played really exciting football, and they're the type of team that you want to tune in and watch week in, week out, the way they've played this year. 33-17, not an accurate representation of how good this team has been this season and how good they can be. But again, like we saw earlier in the year, they only need 1 or 2 injuries and their game plan goes out the window. We saw this earlier in the season too, when they lost both of their hookers, and they just weren't able to compete at the set piece. I think in that first round, that first time this happened, Sam Talakai shifted into hooker, and so they were able to keep contesting at the breakdown and at the scrum time and contesting in the lineouts. But this week they didn't choose to do that decision, and they went to non-contested scrums. But at this level, you can't afford to not have your best 15 on the field at all times, and you can't afford to not have a hooker playing hooker. We saw it when it came to set piece time, at line-out time, that Richard Hardwick twice in a row got penalised for not throwing the ball straight and did the same thing both times.
Yeah, you got to feel for Dickie Hardwick there. He's been one of the best loose forwards in the comp all season, and now you're saying, now you fix your set piece. Come on, let's have a throw. Yeah, you're right about the Rebels. They've been in patches the most entertaining team in Super Rugby, period. And you saw glimpses of it against the Brumbies. Matt Gibbon getting on the outside and then having your loose head prop throw a beautiful ball to Carter Gordon. It's champagne footy, and they can do it. It's really good to see. But the depth will continue to be an issue. And personally, I feel until there's a strong Dua Shield competition, domestic comp in Melbourne, it's going to be really tough. I know that there's Rebels, who are playing in the Shoot Shield, who are playing in Hospital Cup on their off weeks, but you've got to start developing that game, that second tier level in Melbourne, to a higher standard. And we're not going to see the Rebels be able to pull up players and have that depth that the Kiwi teams have until we've got a healthier domestic competition down there.
It's exciting looking forward to 2024 for the Rebels and seeing the players that they've got coming back or coming home to Melbourne. So Taniela Tupou's on his way down. Trevor Hosea's, not Trevor Hosea, Lukan Salakai Loto. Trevor Hosea is off, isn't he? He's off to Europe.
He's off to Japan.
Japan, yeah. So Salakai Loto. Who's the other one? There's one other player that they've got coming. It's escaping me now. Do you know?
Well, they got Matty Phillip leaving as well, off to Cannon Eagles. So it's a bit of a sliding doors moment and swinging doors. Tupou's a huge in for the Rebels for next year. I mean, we talk about their front row depth and having their hookers, being covered across. Having at his day the world's best tight head is a huge in. a huge in for the Rebels. So massive, you expect massive things from there. And there's a couple of, previous Queensland connections with, likes of Alex Murphy down there as well. So they're not new combinations. They've got a good platform to start with. And having Taniela down there brings a real spark to the game in Melbourne. He's probably the most marketable Wallaby at the moment there is. I mean, they're running for all the stand previews. All the kids down in Tassie just loved him, adored him. And, he's a household
He's like a big
name.
teddy bear. You just want to give him a cuddle.
No, he's 100 plus. What are we going to say? $140, I reckon, running around when he's fully fit. And it's awesome to see. So he's a highlights reel as well. And him in being able to engage with the Melbourne community is going to bring more media to the Rebels. It's going to bring more coverage overall, and it will bring more interest. So I'd love to see a fully fit Rebel side with Tupou at the helm, with these rising 7 stars coming through, with returning players like Salakawa
Lancaster, yeah,
and Darby Lancaster. Yeah, I would love to see a packed Amy Park for a Rebels game. That's such an important thing for Australian rugby, to see this franchise that's much maligned, if we're honest. They've copped a lot since they've come into the competition. Why in Melbourne? Why will this work? Bums on seats and wins fixes everything. So Tupou there is a big part of
that. Building on that point, I think the important thing for them moving forward is, yes, they've got a good 15 and that they've got some players now that are going to add to the current 2023 team. Without the players that are leaving, it's going to be that next level, like you mentioned before, getting those players who, once they get 1 or 2 injuries, who are going to step into that position, step into the second row, step into fly half if need be, step into fullback, that have the experience and are Super Rugby level, which is going to be so important for them. Because at the moment, they have players like Andrew Kellaway, and when he's there, he's great and he deserves all the time that he can get. But the guy that comes in over the top of him when Kellaway's injured isn't really at Super Rugby level at the moment, and that's when they struggle. And if you've got 2 or 3 injuries in a game and that's happening and you're losing your star players off the field, that's when your game plan goes to poop. And that's what we saw this week.
Yeah. Just quickly as well, a massive shout out to Reece Hodge. 100 games to the Rebels, the club's first ever Centurion. Didn't get the send-off he deserved. He cops a yellow card in his 100th game. And I would have loved to see him go off with a win, but massive achievement being the club's first Centurion. He's going to be very sorely missed, not only from the Rebels, but from Australian rugby. Is the Mr. Fix-It. He's won us games at fly half. He's won us games on the wing and at centre. And I know he's been a victim of his versatility, but he will be missed when he goes to Bayonne. So congratulations.
And I guess that's a little bit of a theme of the Australian round that was round 15 for Super Rugby Pacific this week, that we had 2 massive players for the Wallabies and for Australian rugby, Reece Hodge and Michael Hooper, playing their last home game, or playing their last games or home games for their club. And you would have loved to have seen their teams put in big performances for them, send them off winners. But unfortunately, as has been the case for the last few years in Australian rugby, they go out losing. So it's unfortunate, and it is kind of where we sit as Australian rugby fans at the moment, sort of hoping that we can put in a better performance for the guys that have put their blood, sweat and tears into the game for so long. But all the best, and thank you to both Michael Hooper and Reece Hodge, both Manly boys. So a lot of talent from Manly, from New South Wales and Sydney out there in the world doing big and better things for Australian rugby is awesome. Good to see as well. Let's now look at the quarterfinals and what's coming up. So the first quarterfinal this coming Friday is the Blues versus the Waratahs. Now, this is hosted by the Blues. This is being played in Auckland at Eden Park. Massive ground, massive opportunity for the Waratahs here. Few injuries from this week that are going to really shape how the Waratahs structure their team for this game. Do you think realistically the Waratahs have any chance of going and causing an upset?
It's a long shot. I think they've got a better chance than the Reds and the Chiefs on current form, but there was not a heap in that Tars game that gives me hope and inspiration that they're going to come over and do a job at Eden Park, which is famously a tough place to win games for Australian sides. I think that there is a chance, if they are able to apply really strong pressure through their defensive line speed and take the space away from their outside backs. That's going to be hugely important when you've got, a Caleb Clark, a Rico Ioane, a Mark Talia running around. So line speed and just sheer bloody-minded grit in defence will go a long way to keeping the Tars in this game. Can you find a spark of hope in your diehard blue heart for an upset over there?
If I'm Darren Coleman right now, so we're recording this on Monday night in Sydney. So tomorrow morning, I walk into Tars HQ as Darren Coleman. I say, all right, boys, sit down. This is the game plan. Mark Talea, get him off the park. Do it legally, but do what you have to do because he is a one-man rugby team at the moment. If you can shut him down, we're probably in with a crack. So that's where I'd be targeting.
It'd go a long way. It would go a long way to it. And then you only have to worry about Bowden Barrett, Dalton Papali'i, the rest of the motley crew.
Like we've got a list, guys. We're going to go 15, 14. No, but really, seriously, the Waratahs are going to have to play at their absolute best, and they're going to have to put in a performance of the season to kind of come close to the Blues. The one a bit of optimism I have is that when the Waratahs have their best team on the field, they have shown that they can put in good performances this season. They can push teams. That game down in Canberra, what was it, 2 months ago now, when they pushed the Brumbies right to the end. Well, they led the game and the Brumbies just came through and won it at the end there. If they can put in a performance like that, they can push the Blues. They are capable of doing it. The worry is that we have a big injury toll at the moment and we haven't had the cohesive approach to the game that I would have preferred. So Jake Gordon suffered HIA last week, so he's out this week. Harry Johnson-Holmes is injured. Isaiah Parisi is most likely injured and not going to be able to play. We don't know yet whether Fekete is available for selection, whether he's due to be back this week, but it's still touch and go at this point. So, I mean, that's most of our Wallabies at the moment. Not available for selection.
On the sidelines, jeez.
It doesn't bode too well for the Waratahs. You would have also liked to have seen them put their best 15 out last week with the players playing together to get momentum, beat Moana and come into this finals game with momentum and sort of a bit of belief. Last week's mental toll, last game in Sydney, Hooper's last game, not getting up, not getting the victory. I wouldn't be surprised if the Waratahs are a bit flat and that they come into this game and sort of, they've already spoken in the media around the mountain that's ahead of them and the mountain they have to climb to beat the Blues at Eden Park. And I do wonder if that's just the mental side of things is going to be a little bit too hard for them this week.
It'll be a tough one. But look, you're looking at the Blues and the Waratahs. The Chiefs and the Reds is no easier for our Aussie teams. And they're up again on the Saturday afternoon. Is there any hope, Mitch, of the Reds pulling another away win over the Chiefs this season? Can lightning strike twice?
The only hope you would have is that you've done it before. So in some ways, you know what you need to do. You need to just think, what was it, 3-4 weeks ago, we went to New Plymouth, I think it was played, that one. We went there and we beat this Chiefs team. Yes, they might have rested some of their All Blacks and we'll get some of our Wallabies back as well this week. So let's do it again. Let's go there and let's shock them and let's play it. So I think the Reds have the attitude that they need to know that they can do it because they've done it. But whether they're able to actually sort of shake off the shackles of that performance, that second half against the Drua last week and go again. And the travel is a big thing. We've spoken about it as well earlier in the podcast, even that those teams that have to travel in travel weeks and how far they have to travel, no team has really been able to bounce back. The Reds have to fly from, I don't know what their plans are or how they've done it, but theoretically they have to fly from Suva back to Queensland and then from Queensland over to Auckland and then Auckland down to Hamilton to play the Chiefs. And that's a lot of travel. So
yeah, for sure. They're coming off the trip to Dunedin as well the week prior. So they've gone the length of New Zealand, back up to Fiji, back home, and then probably you're bussing it, down the over the Bombays down to Hamilton for the game, which will be a full house. You got not unbeaten Chiefs. Obviously, the Reds got there, but 13-1 Chiefs coming into a home quarterfinal against the one team that beat them. It's going to be steaming there.
If I was Brad Thorne, I'd be taking heaps of what's it called, like padding, fluff, the like stuff you put in pillows, so you can just hand it out and get rid of those cowbells in the crowd. You can shut those cowbells up, you're in with a chance.
Soundproof. I honestly love the cowbells. They're better than the vuvuzelas of a couple of years ago in South Africa. But that's gonna be a tough game. And I mean, I would love to say that the Reds, will charge through to a semi. I think it would be the biggest upset of the year for them to do it again. To do it twice. In fact, it would probably be the story of modern Super Rugby, at least from Super Rugby Pacific's inauguration when it started last year. To see that 2 away wins for the same Aussie side in New Zealand against the winners, I mean, that's massive.
What a way to send off Brad Thorne. That would be awesome.
What a way as well. And it would likely set up a semi, probably against the Crusaders. But can the Drua pull off the real miracle of Super Rugby Pacific, mate? They've got them on Saturday evening, 5:00 at Orange Theory Stadium. Is there a hope? Is there a hope for the Fiji and Drua?
Look, part of me kind of hopes that just the Christchurch-based Fijian fans, and there are a fair few of them, when you think about how many Fijians even play for the Crusaders, would be showing up in full force, full Fijian Drua kit, cheering for the boys, getting behind them. That might be enough to kind of put them in with a chance. I think the first maybe 25, 30 minutes is going to be the real teller of this game. If the Drua can keep with the Crusaders for that long, they're potentially in with a shot. We know, and we've seen through this season, that the Drua need to start well, like they did last week. That try in the 3rd minute against the Reds really put a wind in their sails and lifted them. If they can start well against the Crusaders, I think they've got enough belief to kind of carry through. But if the Crusaders can put 1 or 2 tries on really early, I think that's when the Drua will start that fatigue might set in, that mental element might come in. They might start to realize what a mountain it is to actually go to Christchurch and beat the 7 in a row Crusaders at home in a quarterfinal. But never say never. This team has shown last week, if they can play and replicate what they did last week against the Reds, they can beat any team in this competition.
And they can. I mean, they've done it. They've already beaten the Crusaders this year. So like you mentioned with the Reds and the Chiefs, there is that underlying belief that you can take down to Christchurch and say, let's just do it again. Let's put everything in and do it again. I think you're probably going to see the Crusaders a bit miffed that they have to play the Drua. I think it's probably the least favoured opponent when Scott Robertson's going through and doing his planning, sees that he's playing the Drua and goes, throw the plan for the Reds or whoever out the window who
Can you imagine, though, if the Drua do get up, that Scott Robertson would finish his career at the Crusaders, 6 from 7 or whatever, how many in a row it is that he's won there. He finishes up his time as the Crusaders, bowing out in the quarterfinals against a team that only came into the competition last year, who he didn't beat earlier in the season.
And then would that even taint the legacy of however many championships? It probably would. That's how high their standards are. But
for him, definitely.
Yeah, personally, for sure. It'd be an interesting dynamic to see heading into an All Blacks role. But look, I think we're going to see the Crusaders roll on through. Expect a lot of really strong tactical kicking out of 9 and 10. Richie Moana plugging corners, making the Drua try and run out of their own half and force errors. So I'd be very surprised to see the Crusaders drop 1 at home.
Yeah. We might look at the Brumbies game and then I'll get your thoughts and we'll do our tips for the quarterfinals and then we'll finish up. So last game of the quarterfinals, 7:35 on Saturday evening, the Brumbies hosting the Hurricanes. This is a repeat of the quarterfinal from last year. We know the Hurricanes have put in some good performances in the last 2 weeks. They're finishing strongly their season. Can the Brumbies do it? Can the Brumbies cause, maybe not so much an upset, but can the Brumbies push through to a semi-final?
Yes, in short, they can. And the Brumbies should go into this as favourites. I know the Hurricanes are coming off a big win and the Brumbies have had their late season wobbles against the Force and then losing to the Chiefs took a bit of wind out of their sail. But the Brumbies at home are a serious problem across this competition. No one likes going to Canberra. It's heading towards the middle of June. It's going to be
Cold.
freezing,
There's nothing
miserable. And you've got all the Hurricanes boys coming on, traveling, knowing that, last year we came here and we quarterfinal, we lost. And now we have to go and do it again. We have to do that again, and we didn't get that home semi. So massively important that the Brumbies are playing this at home. You go in as favourites, and you think that with the firepower that they've got, not just, with the Tom Wrights and the Corey Tools have been, setting up and scoring all the tries, but it's almost at full strength. It is an almost entirely Wallaby pack, or Wallaby standard pack. And that's where that battle is going to be won. They've got brilliant forwards, the Hurricanes, your Tyrell Lomaxes, your Safara Mullers, your Dane Coles, Artie Sarve is the heartbeat of that. But I think the Brumbies have too much class in the forwards to drop this one at home.
My biggest fear for the Brumbies is that if this was played in round 4 or 5 this season, I think that they comfortably beat the Hurricanes. And we saw them start Super Rugby Pacific this year really strongly, the Brumbies. That performance against the Blues down in Melbourne for Super Round in round 2 was an absolute masterclass in how to shut down Kiwi sides. But the last few weeks, they've sort of gone away from their kind of set piece, and they've whether it's through personnel, like they're not selecting their best 15 week in, week out, and they're resting players and the protocols that come through that, they just haven't seemed as dominant as they have starting in the season. So if they're able to get back to that form and able to put that game plan to the Hurricanes, I think they'll win convincingly. I think it's a big plus for the Brumbies. The Lord Laurie was in COVID isolation last week, so he wasn't able to attend the Rebels game. So by all reports, he'll be out of isolation and able to attend training this week and get the boys up for the game. So I think that alone will be a big thing. He's retiring at the end of the year as well, so that's going to be a massive motivation for the boys to put in a big performance. Last home game of the year for the Brumbies. If they do go through next week, they do play away from home. So I guess if you're a Brumbies fan, make sure you get there. If you're a Waratahs fan, there's nothing else on Saturday night, so might as well drive down the freeway and attend the Brumbies game as well and cheer for your fellow Aussie Super Rugby team. Let's I'll get your thoughts and your tips now for all 4 games. So starting with the Blues, which way are you going to tip this one?
I'd love to be able to tip the Tars, but it'll be the Blues, and they'll do it fairly comfortably, I think. I'm going to say Blues by 14, with Mark Talia just being a big problem.
And how many tries is he going to score?
Oh, he'll only score 2, but that'll be the margin. That'll be the difference.
Yeah, I'd love to say the Waratahs as well, but I think I'm also going to go with the Blues. I'll say by 5. I hope the Waratahs can keep them to at least a score. If they can do that, I think they've done enough. Next game, Chiefs and Reds. Can the Reds get the upset again?
I want to say they can so badly, but it's just going to be such a mess in Hamilton. If they can drag him into a scrap, they can keep it close. But I think the Chiefs are able to grind this one out. It's tighter than people think. I'm going to say the Chiefs by 10.
I also think the Chiefs will win this one. They rested a few of their All Blacks last time, and the injuries that the Reds have sustained in the last few weeks, I think, is probably what's going to be the difference for them. With players like Damien McKenzie, Sam Cane coming back in, Brad Weber coming back into this Chiefs team, I think they're too class at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Chiefs win by 14 plus in that game. Crusaders Drua, which way are you tipping this one?
I'm going to tip Drua. I can't not tip them. I want them to win it so badly. And while the Crusaders have every right to win this, comfortably by 20, 30 points, I'm going to tip the Drua. I'm going to tip them by 2. And it's going to be Kimu Valetini kicking out the penalty at the end.
How good. I'll go with my head this time, not my heart, and say that the Crusaders will win this by 5. But the Drua will keep them within 5, so that's a win in my books. Last game, Brumbies, Hurricanes. What do you reckon?
Oh, it's going to be so close, this one. There'll be less than a score in it. I think it's going to come down to goal kicking as well. So massive night for the Noah Lolacios up against probably Geordie Barrett kicking for the Hurricanes. Geordie Barrett's been on and off this year with his radar. He's had a couple of stinkers.
And that's
I
what
think-
happened last year too, from memory.
I think
They
that'll,
lost because Barrett didn't kick well.
I think that's going to weigh on him. So I'm going to say it's the Brumbies by a point. It's going to come down to that.
It's going to be tight. I think this one's going to be really tight. It'd be interesting to see later in the week which team they name. I know Noah Lolesio has had was out last week with a HIA or concussion. So if he can pass those, in saying that, what's his name? The replacement, Debrasini, he's been good for them this year and he played well for them last week. So be interesting to see which way Larkham. I've nearly said McKellar then. I'm so used to it being Dan McKellar. I would be interesting to see which way Larkham goes in team selection.
I think he'll have to lean back into his combos, and this will be the last. I know I've been rattling on, but that what's worked so well for the Brumbies this year is having the 1-2 punch with their halves combos. So White with Lolesio and then Lonergan with Debrasini.
Yeah,
we've seen towards the end of the year it kind of come unstuck, and that's because those
they've sort of shifted those around, haven't they?
Yeah. So they got to get the band back together.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I'm going to go Aussie heart, Aussie head, Brumbies by 10. I'll say
by 10.
They'll score a few more, rolling more tries, and Noah Lolesio will kick one from the sideline. So let's leave it there. All right. Thanks everyone for getting to this point of the podcast. This has probably rambled on a little bit, but last week of Super Rugby Pacific before the finals, so you can forgive us for that. Our thoughts go out to Ando. Hopefully he's not battling COVID too badly. He should hopefully be getting to the end of it by this time the podcast comes out. So hopefully you're going all right in isolation there, Ando, and you can listen to this and let us know what you think and give us a cry about the Waratahs over the weekend. Lachie, thanks for joining us this week. All the best to your Reds in the quarterfinals. Let's hope that they can get that upset.
And same to you, Taz, mate. Go to the Aussie teams and get behind Fiji and Drua as well. All Aussies through to the quarterfinals. Fingers crossed.
How good would that be? How good would that be? Well, you heard it here first. That's what's going to happen. Next week, we'll be talking about how it's an all Aussie a semi-final in Super Rugby Pacific 2023. Thanks, everyone, for this point of the podcast. We'll be back next week. We'll catch you then. Bye.